Welcome everyone to this session within the Sustainability Week in UPF. Now that it seems that more or less everyone is like a bit conscious about the unsustainability of our society, our model of consumption and the economics, it's interesting that we can have a debate with these guest speakers that are Toni Pujol, that is the Environment Officer at the Urban Ecology Division of Barcelona City Council. He is working on the Urban Ecology Division, and now you're in your department are having projects such as the Barcelona Green Infrastructure and Biodiversity Plan, and I think you're going to talk about this. And then we have Lubomila Jordanova, that she is the founder and CEO of Plan A, which is a startup based in Berlin, and that is working on fundraising on NGOs and platforms that fight against the climate change. And finally, we have Giorgio Scalis, which is an academic from the Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona. He's an environmental activist working on the ecological economics and political ecology, and he's studying hypotheses of sustainable the growth of the economy, and he will talk a bit about this. We will begin with Toni Pujol, that will present us the work they are doing in the division of Barcelona. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, thank to UPF Sostenible for hosting this event, to Post-Crash, to Berta Llugany, Plan A, whoever has been putting the force to make this event happen. Congratulations, because it's not easy in a faculty of economics or sociology to bring environmental topics on debate. Thanks also for coming. From my side, I will just share what we do in the city of Barcelona. I'm an environment officer at the city council, and I think the title of the event is very appropriate, The Road to Sustainability. I like to put this title, Barcelona Works Towards Sustainability. I think sustainability, you never reach that goal, so we always have new challenges, and what I will share with you is a bit the situation of the role of cities in global sustainability, the role of Barcelona, and in our case, the situation of Barcelona in terms of where we see that we are now. I will only tackle with environmental issues, not tourism, no many other topics that are facing our city. And then I will put a couple of examples, so on the debate we can also go on them or tackle on other issues. Cities, why are cities important? We host more than half of the population in cities, and the tendency is that it's growing. So the problems are, most of them originate in cities, and also some solutions are also to be found in cities. Also, I think it's an opportunity. It's if you see at that graphic here, it says that in the next 40 years, less than 40 years now, we have to build or rebuild the same urban capacity that we've built in the last 4,000 years. So, yeah, in that short scale of time, the challenge is very big. So it depends on how we live in these cities and how we build the cities, that the fight for sustainability is moving into one. The battle towards this sustainable world, I think, will be placed in cities. United Nations has recognized a role, but that doesn't mean that our voice is heard in many places. So with the local Agenda 21, with many debates internationally, cities have been there, but still state governments and other powers are more strong in dealing with sustainability. But we also, as cities, we make our voice to be heard in many international events, to say, hey, we face the problems and we are part of the solution. So support us. And in different countries, I mean, Spain or Europe is quite decentralized, so cities have some powers, but we see other cities, for example, in Africa, that the power is very national, so sometimes they don't have the resources to implement some of the policies. Roles, I think that's going to be a lot in the debate, but basically, from my perspective here, I see two different ways. Either you go with a linear model or extractive cities, so you get some inputs into the city and then you throw away the pollutants, the polluted water, etc. So I would call it extractive cities. And the other option is to be more regenerative cities or circular cities, or even degrowth, move towards degrowth. So we need a different model. In which direction? We see many different names. Sustainable city, it's been since Rio 92, but then we see sometimes resilient city, low carbon, biodiverse, resource efficient, green, smart, etc. I think basically everything goes back to this graphic. After this was just a short introduction of where I see that cities have a role in this road towards sustainability. Now I go to our city, to Barcelona. I'm an environmental scientist, but you can define a city as in many ways. I see it as an ecosystem, also a built environment. In the case of Barcelona, for those who are not from here, we have it's a city ecosystem between two rivers, the Llobregat, where the airport is, and Besòs, and then the sea and the mountain in the back. So that's where we have to deal with that surface and that ecosystem. It's a very dense city compared to, of course, it can be more dense, but it's a very compact city. And that gives us some opportunities, but also many challenges. So it has some positive advantages, but also the lack of space is an issue also for putting more green, for example. And yes. So also climate change is also, we are facing climate change, and we have the heat island effect in Barcelona because it's this built environment. So we see some advances. So first with the good news. Compared to some years ago, we treat 100% of wastewater. That seems very logic, but it was around the Olympics that we managed to deal with the water that we throw into the sea, to clean it. So that's not, and many Mediterranean cities don't have that. So it's a good news that we have this treatment of wastewater. We've been decreasing the amount of water that our citizens consume. It's not only because of the policies of the local government, but it's because of the price of water. The tariffication of water has been very important. So the more you consume, the more expensive it is. But also we had some droughts, so that there was lack of water, so there were many campaigns, and at the end, we've reached a good level of water consumption, which is below what many cities are consuming now. Recycling, we've improved. I mean, at the 80s, there were no containers in the street, of separate containers. Now Barcelona has also the organic container. Compared to some German cities, you come from Berlin, we are still very behind that, but I think we've done some progress in this direction. We are around 40% of recycling, and we've realized that if we don't make drastic changes even in the way we collect waste, we won't reach 70-80%. Now in Sarrià, that's only a few months ago, they've started the porta-porta, door-to-door collection system, which was a big pilot project and a big issue, and in some weeks we've shifted from 19% to more than 50% of recycling, even reaching 60-70%. So we need some disruptive projects to make a change. So that's the opportunity is there. Then the last point that I wanted to reach is we've been increasing a bit the green areas, but there's many things to be done. And if you came 15 years ago to Barcelona or 20 years ago and you wanted to drive a bike, it was very challenging. There were no bike lanes, and there were some, and now we've demonstrated that if you put bike lanes, if you put a bicycle so people can test the bikes, then the use of bike increases. So that's one of the positive things that I wanted to to highlight. In terms of environmental issues, challenges, climate change adaptation. So even now we've been having a good period of rain. Drought will be an issue in Barcelona. It is an issue already. Then the energy balance. We've done quite well in water, as I was mentioning, but energy, we're still very inefficient in energy use and also in the production. We have a solar ordinance that it makes it compulsory to put solar panels, but still the use of renewables in the city is very low compared to the potential of sun that we have here. Second point, pollution. Still, we have air pollution, noise pollution. Sometimes it's not that we emit so much, like the pollutants that we emit, but given what I said before, this col in the back, the C in the front, this compactness, sometimes the pollutants stay in the atmosphere and don't go, like in Berlin, for example, there's much more wind, but still, that's no excuse. I mean, we still emit too many cars in the city, basically, because the industry is not the problem. The problem are cars. And noise pollution is also linked to this use of cars still in the city. So we have to do many more mobility projects to improve the eco-mobility in the city. Renaturalization of the city. Renaturalize sounds strange, but it's a word that we use now. So basically, we want to bring back nature into the city, and we'll go on with some examples. Waste production. I mean, we can put a lot of recycling, but if we do not reuse the use of these, we won't win the battle towards waste and towards recycling. The last point, motorized transport. I highlight here the connection with the metropolitan area. So metro, bus, walking, Barcelona, internal mobility is quite good, the percentage. We are above 70% of eco-mobility trips. But when we count what we do around the metropolitan area, we still have many cars coming in and out of the cities. So we do have a challenge there to improve the mobility patterns at the metropolitan level. And yes, this is just, after if you want, we can talk about mobility. I put the bicycle here because it's not because I'm a big fan of this project, but it's something that many other cities have been doing. I think bike is one of the efforts, but we have, if you've been following politics, the tramway, the connection of the two trams in Barcelona is a big issue. And sometimes with bikes, what I want to say is that we just need to make it easy for people. So if we put a bike system, if we put bike lanes, if we subsidize even to go to work by bike, it's subsidized, people will shift. It's just a matter of easing some policies, and maybe you need to put fees for cars to get into the city. That's a political issue, but it's very, very important. Personally, I'm also the parking, the green zone for me is positive. But I think you have to pay for that. I mean, now it's almost free for residents. I think if I don't have a car, why someone who uses that space, public space, permanently, those square meters in a city, in an expensive city for public space, it has to be for free for my neighbor who has 2 cars or 1 car. So I think you have to pay if you use this public space, because otherwise, why don't we put a terrace there with some chairs? So it's just how you see the different things. So we need, in terms of mobility, we need to go into this model. So that's also an economic opportunity for distribution of goods, for example. Second example, and I will finish here, also open for discussion. We drafted this plan. It's called Barcelona Green Infrastructure and Biodiversity. Even the name was an issue. Why green infrastructure? When we talk about infrastructure, it's always gray, the gas, the electricity, the mobility. So we put that name in purpose because infrastructure is something that provides some services, and the green provides many services in terms of environmental quality, in terms of perception for the neighbors, recreation, it's biodiversity. So it was important to have a vision, and now we are implementing some projects to increase green wherever we can in the city and to improve local biodiversity. When people say biodiversity, Barcelona, yes, there is biodiversity, and we can increase that biodiversity. 2 examples. one which is quite complex, but it's very close to here. We drafted what is called the Green Corridor Network. It's a network of green patches to connect some green areas within the city. This is, I don't know if you see the picture very well, it's Ciutadella at the bottom, and the connection with Collserola, it's an opportunity to connect green areas. And we can have something like this. This is Passeig Sant Joan into something that's like this. So here, apart from the quality for residents, we have different levels of vegetation. We have opportunities for birds, for butterflies, etc. Why don't you do that in all the city? It's very expensive. If you see in the left, the corridor would go up. Now, for the next years, will be Pi Margall, which is also connecting Passeig Joanic with going up north in the city. This is something that is long-term, and that's mainly responsibility of the city council, but there are other things that residents and others can do. And this is an example, very small. We talk about species. Here's frogs. Basically, we change the way we deal with some ponds in some parts of Barcelona. And together with Galantus and with the university, in this case was UB, we reintroduced some frog species in some parks. And actually now we are exporting frogs to other cities. So other cities want to do the same. So Barcelona is now giving frogs to other cities. So we can go to Green Corridor to a very, very tiny project. And the last project that it's also very symbolic, but it's a good example. This is the peregrine falcon. This is a bird that was disappeared in Barcelona. And together, again, with another NGO, we reintroduced the peregrine falcon in the city. This actually is nesting in Sagrada Familia. And you can see that, that it's possible. And the more we do, and we have many other projects with bird species or with butterflies, etc. Sometimes you need these small projects to raise awareness. And why not a resident of Barcelona can hear a frog at night or have a green roof or a green facade just in front of their building. So that's the vision that we have now also in the city. Thank you very much. Sorry.
Thank you very much. It's your turn. I'm going to put it. Yeah.
If you go on the top. No, the first one.
Oh. Want to sit here?
Yeah, I can do some rearrangement. Okay. Hi, guys. It's a pleasure to be here from Berlin in a favorite city. Can I not use it? Do you guys hear me with that? the mountains face.
I put this.
Yeah, okay, no problem.
It's
We got the
to-
message.
No, it's to record it.
Yes, okay. So, how do we do this? We use our technology to basically choose the cause and the sub-cause in the region where we're going to be fundraising. And then we find the organization that deals with solving this issue. And then we prepare the campaign, we set the target, and we start fundraising for them. As soon as we've finished with the whole fundraising process, we do tracking, because we know that it's quite important to know what's happening with your money, and especially if we're dealing with an issue that, the results are quite important for all of us and for our own existence. We put a lot of effort into making sure that everything is clear in terms of how money are spent. The 6 themes with which we work and our way of defining climate change are forests, oceans, wildlife, sustainable living, energy, and waste. To give practical examples of the campaigns that we've already done, we fundraise for lemurs in Madagascar. You, of course, know the cuteness of the species, but you might not know that it is actually a political issue, because the population is predominantly under the poverty line. They've ended up selling a lot of the animals to get money, and you can get up to $10,000 for one piece of lemur, according to someone that considers it a piece. But like one animal costs that much, so they go and sell it on the black market. In terms of oceans, the next campaign that we're doing is cleaning up the Indian Ocean. We're working with an NGO in India that is based in Pune, and they teach students to clean basically from plastic and then recycle. And with the money that are gathered from the recycled amounts, they go back into the organization and just expand. In terms of forests, the first campaign that we worked on was planting 100,000 trees on 4 continents. We worked with 4 organizations, European organizations that work in Asia, Africa, Europe, and South America. Sustainable living has been our second campaign that was focused on orangutans, elephants, and tigers in Asia and Africa. But how is this related to sustainable living? Basically, due to the fact that people were poaching the animals became very aggressive. So basically, in these 3 countries, we focused on kind of giving resources so that humans and wildlife can live in peace. And energy, we're doing in 2 months' time a campaign in Liberia. Liberia, again, yet another statistic is 5%, under 5% of the population has access to electricity. So you can imagine, we're sitting comfortably here and we can use a microphone and everything, but these people just don't have access to heated water, for example. Waste is the next campaign that I mentioned, and we're also going to be doing e-waste campaign for Europe. The luxury of a developed or like a society that consumes a lot is that we buy a lot of gadgets, we buy a lot of products, and we end up just leaving them to sit in a shelf. Unfortunately, this iPhone that is sitting here is impossible for a normal human being to recycle. I wouldn't be able to break this down into pieces myself and then kind of be capable of knowing where to put the aluminium and then the plastic. It just doesn't work like that, and this is a problem that is not talked about, and we keep on kind of increasing it. These were the few examples. How do we work? We are for profit. We're a GmbH, which is the limited company in other countries structure. What we do is we fundraise from businesses which have a clear background. We don't take greenwashing money or someone that no oil company or coal company would be of interest for us. but any sustainably producing companies, a partner that we've already either looked at or are willing to work with. We fundraise from individuals, which happens mainly through educational events. Maybe some of you were there last night. We actually had a movie screening in your university on the other campus. And what we do is through these events, we kind of try to explain the issues in a more digestible and relatable manner. So it doesn't seem like, it's just yet another statistic of $100 billion drama that you have to deal with yourself and buy some solar panels, become vegan and all that stuff, Finding ways for you to be the kind of empowered part of the problem solving. And this is us. So this is the Planet team. Vamsi is building the technology. Petya comes from a research background. She used to work in the UN. And now she's focusing on kind of developing our methodology and capacity to actually understand adequate fund allocation and also efficiency in what we do. Nathan is doing all this funny that we might have not read yet, but I'm hoping you're going to read after this. Content which explains issues like what is CO2, what does it mean to emit emissions, why should we care about wildlife given we're humans and supposedly we're on top of the food chain, which we're not. And Berta, who's in the back there, she is dealing with managing campaigns, so all the time management and keeping us on track with being productive and on time with getting the money where they have to be, fundraising the money, organizing events is what she does. And Scarlett is the design and video. This is where you can find us. I'm happy to speak to all of you, and obviously in the discussion we're going to be able to answer some questions that you guys have. But yeah, get involved, send me an email if you want to talk about something. And tell me about Spanish NGOs, because we've been struggling to find some. If you know some cool environmental projects that you think deserve fundraising and to be spoken about, please let me know. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you also for the invitation to be part of this panel. My voice is a little bit rough because I passed through a virus. I think my role, the way I saw it in the panel, was a little bit different in the sense that I'm not going to present a specific project here, but I'm going to present a kind of theory we are working with here in Barcelona, the theory of degrowth. We have a group. I'm a professor at the university, so my field is ecological economics. Broadly defined is a different type of economics where we take the materiality of the economy seriously. We call it an economics where matter matters. Basically, we don't see the economy just as a flow of goods and services between firms and consumers, which is the standard model those of us who learn economics learn in school. But instead, we see the economics as part of an ecosystem where with materials, energy, resources entering the economy and exiting as goods and services on the one hand, but also as waste on the other. And we are specifically concerned with the question of waste, not only solid waste, but also carbon emissions, all the sort of impacts we are having on the environment, and they are changing our planet for the worse. So the ecological economics is trying to re-theorize the economy and try to understand the fundamental conflicts and tensions between the economy and the environment. Most of standard economics or standard environmental economics tends to, I think, underplay the size of the problem. So in general, those of you who have learned economics or have heard second-hand accounts of economists about environmental issues, you'll probably hear that it's a matter of mispricing the environment. Another word that it's used is externality, which means that it's something that it's not within the market. We create a problem out there, and we just haven't priced it enough so as to pay the cost. Once we do that, supposedly things are going to be in order and everything is going to be fine. This is a very strange idea that it comes, of course, from a particular mindset, which is the mindset of economics, which only sees the market economy and whatever is outside of it, it's considered external, no? It's an externality. So the environment, which is basically the whole world, the planet, no? The one where we live is external, and somehow the market and money is like what is internal. And we have to bring the rest of the world into this system rather than saying, maybe we should put a limit to this system if this system is colonizing and impacting on the rest of the world, no? The theory of degrowth, I mean, let's say, is a theory or a story that goes throughout environmentalism for years, but it comes back and it's, let's say, improved or refined or put in the words of the particular period every now and then. But the story and the idea behind it is very simple, and the idea is that you cannot have a continuous economic growth and increase of the scale of the economy at the pace that we have accustomed to expect, not 2 or 3% growth per year. It's considered to be what a healthy economy is, and expect that you won't destroy the environment in this way. It's as simple as that. So 2 or 3% growth per year means that an economy doubles every 25 to 30 years, you know, which means it's four times bigger after 30 years more, and then 8 times bigger after 30 years more, and 16 times bigger. That's what we call exponential growth, no? So this means that within 2 or 3 centuries, you have like an economy that grows to infinity. And that's what we have grown to be used to expect, no? And say, oh my God, there is crisis, no? We have less than 2% growth. So anything less than exponential growth to infinity for the current system is a disaster. This is where we are stuck right now. So anything less than infinite growth is a disaster for the system. But infinite growth is obviously a disaster for the ecosystem and for all of us. And you can see that it's like an impossible expectation, no? The economy has grown in this towards infinity pace the last 200 years with the Industrial Revolution because we find fossil fuels, and instead, at the beginning, industrializing countries used slaves, no, in the colonies, that they were growing their cotton and their sugar, and then they were dying in the field. After, fortunately, they found coal, and then after they found oil, no? So now we have energy slaves, like we have energy doing the work for us. So we can take our holidays, we can rest a little bit more, some people can have their yachts and their Learjets and fly around, but all this is because we found fossil fuels, no? We found fossil fuels that do most of the work that moves our economy right now. But the problem is that these fossil fuels, of course, are creating a huge problem, which is climate change. If you're an ecologist, you would expect that. No, there is no... Economists claim that they are the ones who say that there is no free lunch, but I think an ecologist understands this much better, no? There is no free lunch to think that you found fossil fuels, you're going to extract them, you're going to move everything 10 times faster, and nothing is going to happen at the end. If you move so much energy, somewhere you're going to have to pay for this acceleration of energy you've brought in the system, no? And the price we pay is carbon emissions, climate change, and the total destabilization of our climate, which is going to make life in this planet very difficult very soon. People are talking about 2050. Some impacts have already started. By the end of this century, the way things are going, life in this planet is going to be hard, very hard for the majority of the people, including us right now, have it kind of okay, no? Maybe a few people manage to insulate themselves, they manage to continue making profits, but the rest of the world is going to have it very hard by the end of this century. If you put down the numbers and you see how much we have to start reducing carbon emissions, we should start like at the global level around 2 or 3% per year, starting yesterday. And in the rich part of the world, supposing that we leave some more room for increasing carbon emissions or increasing energy use in the poorer part of the world, like Liberia that you mentioned, no? If we were to take more of this task on our shoulders, as it would be fair, given that we have emitted the majority of carbon in the past, no? The decline of carbon emissions we should see each year should be in the order of 6 to 10%. This is so that we kind of avoid like the most risky climate change. We cannot avoid climate change anymore, no? But at least to avoid more than 2 degrees Celsius climate change, the scientists say. To give you a sense of these numbers, right now, this year, carbon emissions at the global level are increasing again. So nowhere near to 2-3% reduction. The best we have achieved was like stable carbon emissions for 1 or 2 years last year and the year before. mostly because of the after effect of the crisis and because China was shifting from coal to cleaner energy sources. But cleaner energy sources that still are carbon-based, like natural gas, no? So not huge improvements there. Now, this has come to an end, like China has kind of made this transition, is not using as much coal as before. And again now, carbon emissions increase together with the increase of global GDP. In our part of the world that supposedly Europe is the most progressive, we are doing more, etc., etc., we are nowhere near at this rate of reduction that we are talking about, 6 to 8% reduction of carbon emissions per year. Some countries have kind of reduced their carbon emissions, again, like the UK, because they shifted from coal to natural gas. This comes at the end at some point. Others, what they've done is, they don't produce any more products in their country. They bring them from China, and then these carbon emissions are accounted in China, and they say, we are doing better, Of course, you are doing better until China also starts finding the trick, and they start importing it from Indonesia and so on, no? So that's not improvement at the global level. So this is where we stand. So those of us who write about degrowth argue that there is a fundamental clash between the current economic system works, which is constant acceleration of the way it uses materials, resources, emits carbon, and the ecological challenge. As you understand, that's a very big challenge because the current system, and politically the current system, is geared towards this growth. Because the way the capitalist system works, it needs growth in order not to collapse. So when you stop having growth, you have what we experienced in Greece, which wasn't a very pleasant situation, no? Or what Eastern Europe experienced before. So once the economy cannot have this constant acceleration, then it collapses because it's a system that in many ways it's built around this constant push for acceleration. So as a group of researchers, because the story I've put is not very optimistic now, but of course we are humans and we have to believe in our capacities to change things, even when they seem they cannot change now. So probably if you lived in the age of slavery, it would seem almost impossible to imagine a world outside of it, or in the age of feudals and feudal lords and kings, no? Things change. But we can have this abstract hope, but at least what we can do, each one of us, is, I think, from our role, and the people who already talked from their role do the best that they can, no? Is like push this boat, let's say, to change a little bit of a direction. So from, let's say, our role as researchers here at the University of Autonomy, and with a team we have that it's called Research and Degrowth, and it's based here in Barcelona. We are making a joke with R&D, no? Which is research and development. We call ourselves R&D, but it's research for degrowth. We are trying to think of what sort of changes could take place in the economy to make an economy stable in the absence of growth, or stable in a context of contraction. That's the type of questions you won't hear very much discussed in economic school, because the idea there is like growth is the objective, no? So the models do not necessarily assume growth, they assume equilibrium, et cetera, no? But like the underlying theme behind is that you cannot question growth, no? So if you're an economist, it's like growth is good. Why would you ever question it? No, that's what we are here for. That's what our grandfather Adam Smith studied. That's what we are also studying and trying to contribute to, no? We are reversing this question, and we say if you want to be sustainable, what you need is the growth. And there are no economists and there are no scientists studying really what would it take to do that. So on the one hand, we are trying to do science. We're trying to advocate for this type of science and for this type of thinking. We're trying to make this science and these arguments known outside of our little field of academia and our little mundito, as they call it here, small world of ecological activists, no? But at the same time, I think there is a bigger question, which is the politics of this change and how they could happen, no? Because like this might sound nice, you might say I agree, but say, okay, how do we see that happen? And again, the politics are very difficult, no? You have, for example, a municipal authority here in Barcelona elected with a very progressive agenda, very good ideas that are in this direction. But of course, the limits of a local authority are posed by what they can do with respect to all the flows that they are governed by very different other authorities, no? Not to mention that even laws that have to do about the city, the management of the city. For example, rents in Barcelona, you cannot control them as a municipality, and they're a matter of national law. Then you move at the national level, and then the national level, you will hear what you hear in Greece, which is like, we compete for capital. If we do this type of policies, then capital is going to go away. They're going to say we are turning too socialist, Then we're going to have a crisis. So what do we do, So you have even progressive governments elected with an agenda of reducing carbon emissions, and they don't end up doing too much, no? And then we have the global level, where it's the UN that used to be much stronger during the Cold War, but now has lost a lot of its power. And a lot of these issues are problems that have to be governed at the global scale, but the UN has lost its power to mediate at any relevant scale of that problems. So we're stuck in a very difficult situation there. Where can we find the hope from in this situation? Where can we find hope from? I think is that there are people in the ground, and there are movements, and there are political movements that they are aware of this situation, and they are trying to do things differently. So there are social movements, for example, that they try to stop fossil fuel extraction, which is the first good and very important step. There are social movements together with political movements that are trying to argue for example, the right of people to the city, which means the right of people to have access to affordable housing in their cities. This might not sound necessarily linked to the environment, but it's very linked to the environment, because if you don't have access to cheap housing and you have to commute from very far away, you emit much more carbon. If you can live close to your house, or if you have close to your work, close to your house you live. If you can live close to your work, and not have to commute from far away or use a bicycle, for example, the whole dynamic changes. And the whole dynamic has to change in a radical way. I mean, we have to radically change the way we provide infrastructure if we are to go to zero carbon. This means like we have to occupy the territory with solar and wind. We have to build lines that they would have to be underground or overground that bring electricity from there. We have to have batteries. This is like a huge transformation that I think right now we are nowhere near it, And it's a huge transformation that we can't do the way we did the previous huge transformation, which was by using fossil fuels and oil, And by growing the economy. So the hope is in these small social movements that do, not small, and sometimes big, social movements that do things here and there to become a kind of political force, But demands things at a higher level. But as I said, we have always to be aware with the scale of the challenge, in the sense that also national governments are caught in a dynamic of competition where you can't go your own way. So I know we have to be optimistic, but I think we also have to be realistic, and it's good to be optimistic once you know where you start from. So I wanted to set a little bit the landscape of where we are and how difficult it is where we find to position what we are doing in relation to that. Thanks.
Thank you, all of you. At the beginning, I forgot about speaking a bit about who we are, Post-Crash. Post-Crash is an economic students association that we are trying to actualize our students' plan to make it more connected with the reality, as the same that we think that economy is not apart from, from the environment, and it has to take into account the same of. We do the same with the reality and student plan. So this is why we found this talk really necessary and very interesting, because it approaches to the reality of our cities or experiences we have in the world. And now I think if you have questions, we will open like a moment for asking them. But I want also to make you some questions. And well, I think I found it very interesting because all of us talk about, all of you talk about global experiences, but at the same time you highlight the importance of local experiences. You said that before when we were talking that you fundraise local because they are the ones who know best what they would need to do. You also talk that social movements that are in the cities have a lot of power. And I wanted to ask you, Tony, what do you think about the commons, or more in concrete, we know that in Barcelona, for example, we have that experiences of local urban gardens. And can you relate this a bit about what do you think that citizens in the cities can do or can bring to what you're doing, like in environmentals?
Thanks for the question. Yes, actually, regarding, for example, taking care of our green space or our empty spaces, the city of Barcelona, not only with this government, but in the previous mandate, we had some, because of the crisis also, there were some empty plots, for example, no, that we need to build. For example, here there's a parking area that in some years will be a building, but basically in Barcelona we had many empty spaces. You can do two things. You can just leave it and protect it and put a fence and wait for the economic period that you have more money as a city, or actually to give that to someone else who also, we need space to do urban gardening, to get together, etc. So it was a plan to open these spaces to the citizens, and we made a call. Who wants to do something in that empty spaces? It's called Pla Buits, the name should be, which means empty spaces plan, but it should be Pla Plens, no? Full, because now they are full of life. So many NGOs, neighbors associations, different groups occupied these spaces, so we gave them for 4 years, and it's been a success. And also in the gardening process, we are shifting. We don't want that the citizens ask, you city council, take care of, clean my streets, collect my waste, and have a very nice and green gardens. Actually, what we want is that people, the neighbors also take care of the public space. We just, in the last year, we opened up a new program called Mans al Verd, which means hands to the green. Basically, what we want is that the neighbors, not only for those selected 15 empty spaces, but we're looking at different experiences that the neighbors take care, for example, in front of the house, you know, where you have the tree, that little square. So actually the schools could adopt the plots of the different trees in the street so that they take care of that. So basically the city is of everyone, so we believe that citizens should be able also to manage also part of the city. And that goes to green, but also to energy, to water. So we have to make people aware that the planet is limited, the city is also limited, and we have to co-create and co-use that space. So yeah, it's full into that direction. And actually, the good news is that many times, at least in Barcelona, the city is always behind what the neighbors are proposing. So when we make a call for projects to give some grants, the people, the NGOs, the movements are much ahead, and they suggest to the district, hey, that in Glorious, for example, there was a social garden. Basically, it was the neighbors that say, look, and even for the next year, if the works are not started, we need that place for urban gardening. Actually, there is a big movement in Europe, worldwide, but people are reusing, re-gardening the city and making vegetables, etc. So that's something that we are looking at very much.
To make an extra comment on this, I totally agree with you. And going also along the lines of what you're saying, Georgos, I think we should strike a balance between the individual's responsibility and the responsibility of politics, corporates, and all sorts of stakeholders involved in the process of going towards degrowth and a more sustainable planet. Because with these kinds of initiatives, you end up changing the emissions level, but also changing mindsets, and this kind of leads to a lot bigger results and a lot better improvement than simply, a few flowers extra. And we've seen it in Berlin. Berlin, I'm assuming all of you, or many of you have been there, or at least know a lot about the city, but it's quite of an activist city. It's a place where you have a lot of organizations, not only green, but also just social impact organizations. And there is a lot of urban gardens. Every neighborhood actually gets an allocated space where they can do something interesting with it. And now that Plan A has the following, we organize a lot of events. We had just over the last 1 year at events more than 1,200 people. You can see how people, the moment when you start something that, we started with a green movie night, for example, this led to initiatives that's kind of branched out from what we've been doing. And I mean, you guys are now in the position to be joining societies and being, excited about things. You might have even the time to, and, resources to allocate within your own activities, time to be part of such initiatives. It goes a longer way than simply being, planting a tree or, being excited about a topic.
Yes. Well, meanwhile, I'm going to ask another question or to. Well, no, wait.
¿Cuántas preguntas tenemos?
Bueno, després us faig preguntes, sí. Sí.
So, whoa, I'm not used to talk to a microphone. Then, if I have the opportunity to ask just one question, it's for you, Georgios. At first, thank you for the presentation. Currently, I'm writing my final paper on the industrialization in Spain and related to the issue of the privatization of commons. And I think that the issue of economic growth is related to demographic change. In pre-industrial societies, we need a demographic growth in order to make them grow. And then in post-industrial economies, there is an stabilization of the population. But when you talk about degrowth, I see the resemblance of degrowth with Malthusian and new Malthusian theories. And I'd like to know if the idea of degrowth and elimination not elimination of pollution, but decreasing the pollution and the waste, etc., is related to demographic controls and a decrease of population.
Okay, so I don't have much sympathy for Malthus, but I think also I think also what he said is sometimes misrepresented for the better. I think he wasn't as ecologist as people tend to think, So yeah, he's actually much closer to what economists are saying today than people tend to understand. But anyways, I think that's a little bit too scholar of a debate, and we can discuss it after. But the question of population is important, I think. So first of all, I would say it's not true that economic growth and industrialization stabilized population. First of all, it was economic growth and industrialization that destabilized population to start with. So population, before the takeoff of industry, was more or less stable, for good or for bad reasons. No, it was also for bad reasons in the sense that many children were dying at birth, and also that people were living slightly less years. But the population was stabilized. The population gets destabilized with the beginning of industrialization. As people are kicked out of the countryside, they go to the city, It's a very different situation. And at the same time, it is destabilized because you have, for a short period of time, but that it's considerable for the population to grow, you have like industrial standards of medical care, with rural or agricultural modes of living still coexisting side by side. So you will have like rural families had to have, 4 or 5 children, 1 or 2 would die, that was the common situation, And they needed a few to help, there wasn't retirement schemes, they would have to help their parents, etc., etc. So you needed to have children. So the common mentality, also religion, everything was geared around families having this amount of children. Then the whole setup changes, So then all children survive, you live longer, you have social security, but it takes some time for this change to catch up, no? So then you still have families that have now 6 or 7 children. You have like a spare of population, but this naturally comes to a peak, and it seems that population now in our part of the world has come to a peak and it's declining. No, Spain, people are now saying we have a problem because population is decreasing, and at that rate, Spain is going to disappear in 200 or 300 years. No, the same I hear in Greece. For the world as a whole, though, population still keeps increasing. And while some scientists were saying that it's going to peak by 2050, which would be good news, it seems now that it's not going to peak by the end of the century, because still there are countries in this transition phase that still experience population growth. Where does this leave us now? It doesn't mean that because we want the growth, we have to be anti-human and say that having children is bad or having people is bad, no? But this doesn't mean that we don't have to discuss about and think about what is good for the population or what is good for controlling the population growth, so that it's not totally unsustainable, and how could this be done in a way that it's not authoritarian, that it's not repressive, that it's not any of that. And we know that there are good things. We know, for example, that where women have equal rights and they have control of their bodies, that in these countries you don't have this explosion of population. So we would focus on things that they are good in their own, for their own sake, and they are democratic, no? For example, women's rights, rather than focus on population as a problem per se. That would be my take. And on the other hand, I would fight seriously against the discourse that it's now re-emerging in our part of the world, no? Which is like, we're having a population problem, we're having too few children, and this is a demographic problem. Already in China, you know, there is a reverse of policy now, and it's like, the idea is you can have more children is better, and it starts being incentivized. And you hear now about countries like France trying to incentivize more children, etc. I think a natural, as it is now, and not coercive stabilization or even decline of the population is not bad. Of course, what is bad is to say, you know, I'm not going to help African countries have better health systems because this is going to increase their population. This is like murderous, and this is like terrible, no? Or it's fascist to say that I'm going to give birth rights to people, you know, that there are some ideas like that, and then they can exchange them in markets. Or I'm going to control how many children people have and put them in prison if they have more. So nothing like that. But if there are dynamics that naturally stabilize the population or even decline it, I think we should support them and be in favor rather than say, oh my God, population bomb, we should have more children again.
Thank you for the conference. My question is, what do you think that lacks currently in the media to make people more aware of the environmental needs? And what is the message that should media tell to people so that they are more aware of the situation?
We live in a very sensationalist society where news is literally reducing and diminishing in length and importance by the minute. So you have something that today is, you know, of huge importance, and tomorrow it doesn't matter at all. This short-term thinking, to me, is the biggest problem, and the way media projects things is without kind of pushing out ideas which have a long-term impact on our lives. And the discussion is, you know, you have a bit of Trump, you have a bit of, you know, some sort of a local story, but stories of persistent drama that is, for example, what is happening in Syria. And I'm not going to open, you know, the political side of things that we hear about, but this is, you know, missing. We don't follow up with stories. So if one recipe that I've seen has worked is the idea that you work with information that gives solutions. So what this means is that you explain the problem, but you explain it in a manner that it is it can become part of your reality to be part of the solution. And then you explain also the solutions and the existing ways of which you can act on it. How media works at the moment is that we're thrown pieces of information and we're supposed to, like, reflect on them and possibly even not, unfortunately, and then, move on to the next thing. So what I would think you can do immediately now is, like, look for analysis and look for perspectives, because we're very limited in terms of what is given to us as, the full side of the story. So that's the only way. Otherwise, we can open a whole new discussion about media dominance and, how there is also media corruption and all that stuff all across the planet. So yeah, that's my opinion.
No. I fully, and in that sense, I fully agree. I think it's no time to just put the big, drama or the big problem only. We have to, when we give a message, give also the opportunities of people to what can I do, because of the problem is when it's so big, climate change is like, everything. I think it's important to give opportunities at different levels to act, to implement things. Yeah. So. I also have a question. Yeah? Okay. Well, my question was, again, to Georgios. How do you pronounce your name?
Yorgos.
Yorgos, sorry. Basically, in climate change or also in other topics, we see many times between countries the behavior of free rider. Basically, I'm a country, I benefit from the reductions of other countries because it's, the atmosphere, it's not localized, like, it's not territorial. So basically, we see that behavior in many negotiations. We currently have a very weak UN system, as you mentioned. We do not have the appropriate international institutions. Do you see any window of hope, any area where the degrowth implementation can be put in place without, for example, in Barcelona, if you say you cannot build more hotels, then they build them in Hospitalet de Llobregat, no? It's an example of limitation, but if only one applies it, then the other ones benefit from that implementation. That's one part, and then that would be much more international. And locally, I think I would appreciate if you can give us some examples of implementation of these degrowth movements. I've heard of transition towns and different examples, but I think to leave this room with some more positive, I think if you have some examples that you can share of at the local level or at business models that degrowth theories have been implemented.
Yeah, normally we give Barcelona as an example, but I can't play that trick now, so I'll have to find other examples now.
No, I would appreciate if you help us to see what you say.
No, at the global level, yes, I recognize that that's a big problem now. But of course, it's a big problem as long as you consider growth as the objective and carbon emissions as a cost that you try to pass to someone else. Assuming that there would be a movement or a political commitment or a social commitment to saying, like, we're not going after growth or we're going after a different type of project that it's more sustainable for the sake of being more sustainable because it's better for us and it's better for the rest of the world, then it would be less of a free rider because you don't need to ride, let's say, the same bus with the others, no? So you would say, like, I don't want to emit carbon emissions. And the idea would be that you would do that because you would do things that you find good per se. So you want to have affordable housing for everyone. This reduces carbon emissions. Mm-hmm. So it's a double benefit. So you do that, and you don't feel you're being cheated because China can emit more carbon, no? Because you have more affordable housing, and that's what you're doing. In the same way, you modernize your energy system, you change the way your cities are organized or your transport system is organized. You have more public transport, more trains and buses instead of having more cars. And you politically and you as a group of people that are majority in this country believe that this is also a better way of living your life. Only in this way I can see it happening, because if you see it as a cost, yes, of course, then you want to pass it to someone else. Now, we are very far, of course, from a country or or even a political movement that has exactly this idea, no? And would say, but we're not super far, no? For example, you have now, I have colleagues who are in contact with the opposition party in Britain, the Labour Party, and they are open to these ideas. I mean, of course, they say, yes, we will need growth unless the economy is going to collapse with Brexit. But they are open and they have commissions where they discuss these things. They're saying, okay, how could we start like reducing this emphasis on growth? How could we start thinking about the economy and well-being in a broader way? So I think that's a good starting point. It's not enough, of course, when we put it in relation to the challenge. So then if I have to be realistic, which is not necessarily optimistic in that sense, I would say that it would be a kind of adaptation to post-crash, not post-2008 crash, but post-crash of the crash that it's coming now and in the future, no? So it would have to be necessarily some kind of adaptation to not being able also to have growth anymore. Because I'm not very optimistic that as long as growth and expansion is possible for countries, that they're not going to go this way. So I advocate, but I'm not naive, no? I live also in this world, so I know that it's difficult. But I think as long also that you cannot get growth and you have like instability in your country, you have pollution, you have like climate change start impacting also your country and other parts of the world. So then I hope that in this context, a progressive response can be one that it's close to what I argue as the growth. But I don't see it coming in everything is going fine and then we decide we don't want growth and we're going to start shrinking the economy. No, this I don't believe. So good examples at the local level, I wouldn't go to, there are not ideal, I mean, there is the transition towns, which for those of you who might not know, is a movement of cities that they have allied local movements and local town authorities that they have signed a list of principles that they are similar to what I talk about, the growth. And they have a mindset that this is an adaptation to the end of oil, climate change, etc. And they try to implement this in their cities, which I think is a good starting point. But normally these are very small cities. They are in England. I visited some of them. They're the kind of hippie, we have a nice life here type of cities in Cornwall. So it's nice, but it's not something that necessarily can be generalized everywhere. But I think it's a good starting point, no? And it's good if it gets more diverse than the type of cities that are involved now. If we move to bigger cities, I use Barcelona as a good example because, for example, in the program of the current municipal authority of Barcelona and Comú, I found, for example, a good development that there weren't any references to growth. We need economic growth of the city, etc., etc. And the whole aspect of the economy of the city was approached in a very different way, which is the way we advocated to be approached, which was not to talk about the economy as a special sector that we need to have businesses and growth, etc., but it was integrated and was part of other objectives. Now we need housing for everyone. We need a good environment for everyone. We need the city to be socially responsible with the rest of the world. So in this context, what do we do with economic policies? Which I think is also the mindset of the growth. So we don't see the economy as a system out there that needs to grow, but we say what we really need as society, what is good for our well-being, and then we see what this means for the economy. So these are found as a good development. And then I think the type of projects you mentioned, however limited and also taking place in other cities, are important, like affordable housing, I said, public space, liberated public space, so that we don't have to consume in order to have a nice life, no? If you have an urban garden, if you have a public square, that here in Spain, fortunately, we have more than in other places, but if you have space where you can go and have fun without necessarily having to travel, to consume, yes, to use a lot of electricity, all these things are good and I think are in this philosophy.
I think it's really interesting what you are saying, and now I want you to relate it, or because in Barcelona we know that we have mass tourism, so it's like a bit contradictory, not contradictory, but contraposed, like affordable living, managing open space, but tourism is based on consumption. On how will you relate this? I mean, Barcelona is dependent on tourism, and more or less, and we will never like say no, we want no tourists, because people, commerce. How can you relate this to the growth and how it could be more management or sustainable, this model?
Yeah, I have to say, because I came here as a tourist too, no? So I'm not, I always have a problem when I see somebody say no more tourists, etc. I say, I wouldn't be here in the first place, and most of my friends, so it would be a very different city. So in one sense, we don't want to close borders, no? And we don't want you to mix a xenophobic argument against foreigners and against tourists in general. No, I don't think I would say something very, very creative. I think what the city is trying to do is already in this direction, no? Like trying to limit and in a way limit the type of tourism that it's not good for the city anyway, and it's not offering anything more, and try to strengthen and give incentives for the type of tourism that it's, it's a tourism that it's more low intensity, experiences the city in a way that it's more conducive also to interactions with people in the city and doesn't upset the everyday life that much. Try to limit the explosion of, I don't know, Airbnb houses, but in a way, again, that it's fair to people that might depend nowadays on Airbnb. So it's a kind of tricky balances there. I would say I would be against a model of tourism for tourism's sake, which is the same with growth for growth's sake. Like as many tourists as possible are coming here, or as many night stays, how they calculate it, no? Say 5 million, this year 6 million. In Greece, we do that a lot, Again, this type of statistics where we say, oh, Greece is now 4th below Turkey. We had only 20 million tourists this year, We need 22 million. No, we don't need 20 million tourists or 22 million, We need a sufficient amount for the city to have a vibrant economy, and we need type of tourist or tourism that will come here and be good for the city rather than be bad, no?
Yeah, I will give my personal perception and opinion. Basically, I think what the city council shouldn't do is to spend a lot of money in actively promoting more tourism. I think it's a sector of the economy that it's already going well. Of course, you have to modernize and try to get the lowest impact tourism as possible. But I think what we need to do is internalize actually the cost of tourism also for the neighbors. So we need to know not only the benefits, at least we need to know we need to clean the streets much more. You have a lot of energy consumption, water consumption, public services consumption. So that has to be the city that we manage. It's not only for the 1.6 million inhabitants, it's for the tourists, it's for the visitors, etc. So first of all, we have to manage the city. We have to prepare the city for this tourism. Also, we need to lower the impact. So, for example, I think there's a lot of work at the harbor. We have the cruises. First, you have to question how much the carrying capacity, we use that for ecosystem, but what is the capacity of the city to absorb? What's the level of number of boats that you can host there? But for example, for me, the electrification of the port, it has to be a priority. I mean, and we have the advantage that Barcelona now is, okay, it's a destiny that many companies want to come. So at least if we put, look, unless you have an electric boat, or you at least for the last part of the distance that you come with the boat, we cannot have more emissions there. We have all public sec suffering from the boats, or if they stay there in Barcelona 2 nights, these more 15,000 people that are in the boat, you have to make it with the minimum environmental impact. That's a big priority. Then the economy, I think Barcelona has to diversify the economy. Of course, if we say it's a wheel, no? If you want more millions, then you only specialize in tourism, then you will be until the day that the tourism doesn't come anymore because it's just too much. So we need to diversify the economy of the city. And yeah, that's just some points, because the debate will go on on these a lot.
Thank you for your presentation, you all. I would like to ask Tony. So 2 quick questions. One from the perspective of practical solutions. So you mentioned adopt your tree. So the place where I'm working now, we adopt 2 trees in Carrer de Girona, which is great. The idea is they explained us that they want to close the street and make it walkable in the long term. And we were asking ourselves, you know, it's a great thing, but this is an area where it's already developed and there is movement, there is life. And we were asking ourselves if it could have an effect of, you know, the place is nice, so a good commerce starts, and then a hipster store comes, and then prices go high, and then the rent gets higher. We all know how it ends up. And the central point is why not focusing more in some dead areas? So excluded suburbs, immigrant parts of the city. I would like to know if you are already doing, I mean, the public administration is focusing also to make those kind of actions in such places. And the second question is about theoretical perspective, now going to the degrowth theory. As far as I know, degrowth is a bit skeptical about sustainable development and green growth, and you know, those concepts that sometimes is just marketing. And I would like to know if within the public sphere there are advocates of degrowth or people that are discussing such concepts in the sense of not getting attached to indicators such as GDP or getting more numbers, but reducing those indicators. I don't know if it was clear in the second question.
Yeah. Maybe I'll go on the first one first, and then maybe we can try to answer also the second point. The answer is yes. I mean, Barcelona for many years has been trying to put the same quality of urban space at all areas. So the investment, if you go to Nou Barris or to the mountain districts, or the quality of the public space, of the parks and gardens, and we tried to put the metro, for example, to Carmel, which was a big issue. The governments, not only this government, the last period, they've been trying to give equality in terms of the public investment, or the quality of life, or bringing buses there, or the metro there. So Barcelona has tried to equalize the city. But the reality is that there is, we're moving towards poorer people and some big, richer people. So also the new residents that are coming to Barcelona, coming from, it's like London or Berlin. You know, you have elite that comes to Barcelona, the soccer players or whoever. So you have these big differences still moving. But in terms of what you were mentioning, when we renew a street, for example, Portal de l'Àngel, that at the beginning when we wanted to make it no cars, so make it pedestrian, there was an opposition even from the commercial people saying, no, the people won't come because you are banning cars. The effect has been the opposite, of course. More people coming. Now it's one of the richest streets. We have it in with the new opening of the new market in Mercat de Sant Antoni. Of course, if you improve, or Raval, when you make a big urban renewal and you improve the quality of life, we have the issue of gentrification or the increase of rent. That's an issue. It's happening. Even now, I was yesterday in a conference on green spaces. We call it also that when you make it a greener park, some areas of the city, when they have a park close by, the price of the neighboring buildings goes much up. It's an issue. Barcelona has a big problem with housing. I mean, it's not like Vienna or Berlin that they've been investing and having 20-30% of the stock of houses being public. Then you can do something. Not because in Berlin now there's a big issue of the increase of rents. That's a big issue. But I think we should invest in making public space for everyone. What Yorgos was mentioning is like, I don't want people to have to go to a commercial center out of the city to watch movies or to play in a playground. We have to be able to provide these leisure services in the city, to provide areas for kids to play, to go by bike, etc. So that's more democratic. So democratize the public space is a priority. And in Barcelona, we are trying to put it in all the districts, but it's not always an easy task. And regarding the degrowth, As Yorgos was mentioning, what I've seen a change also. Before it was more, okay, you are the environment and we are the economy. I see a different approach. Even we have the green economy, what they call it, the green sector. So there are other sectors that with lower impact that can be promoted by the city. But maybe you have more to say on that.
One theory that I'm not going to be able to name where it came about is actually embedding environmental costs into the economy itself. And I'm a big advocate of this because I think that this plastic, it should not be that accessible to us to get meat or whatever it is without embedding actually what process this piece of plastic, then the water that was put into it, and the whole production went through to get to us. And this is a big issue because going back to what you're saying, Yorgos, is the system has been built very differently. And how we can already respond to this is actually buying local stuff. Spain has the beauty of, a lot of the things that you can find in supermarkets are produced here because you have good nature and good quality products. This is not true for everywhere. Actually, in London, you go to Tesco's, for example, which is one of the biggest chains, and you get chilies from Bulgaria, you get Moroccan raspberries, and all these things that you cannot. Why? You don't need a mango in the season when mango is not in season. So I think just mindfulness in terms of purchasing habits. Obviously, it's it is a long process, but yeah, next time you go, you might look for Spanish products, or at least European.
Thank you.
Hello. Hello. We have been talking about what the public administration is doing and what the citizens can do on working on the road to sustainability. But I wonder what private companies, how can they look at to the decrease in theory, or how they can work further for sustainability? Because I think they are one of the big part of the problem, because they are even ruling most of the decisions of most of our governments. So how can we work for they adopting these ideas? We have, for example, now an example here in Barcelona regarding the water company. You know that in Barcelona we are trying to create a public water company, but we have been seeing for the last half a year how the nowadays company is ruling a big promotion around her, explaining all the benefits of their management. But this is real, what they are doing with us. So they are changing our perception of what is happening just to keep their benefits. So I would like to Ludmila, what can we do? How can we change the way private companies are working, and how can we go through this road to sustainability?
Yeah, this is a very good question, and it is indeed last year in July, The Guardian came out with, they did an investigation together with Carbon Tracker and found out that actually 70% of emissions, and we know that it's not only emissions we need to look at, but 70% of emissions carbon emissions that have been emitted have been done by 90 companies. So totally standing behind what you're saying. What we're seeing as a good movement is, and why, for example, from a Plan A perspective, we think that the individuals have to be strongly involved in the whole process, is that the societal influence on companies has now led to a lot of companies adopting sustainability practices, reporting on what they're doing with, their waste, and following kind of the orders. The problem lies that you have in majority of, I can definitely speak for European countries, the grand decision-making lying with governments. So, in my opinion, the biggest importance lies in the hands of governments that, by themselves or by the influence of the individuals, push out policies that actually speak about companies giving away part of their profit for, cleaning up their mess. We also have to have the capacity to be part of, also taxes, for example. You have already countries that have been committing part of the employee salaries towards sustainable movement. So I think it's kind of striking a good balance between, companies should do business as usual, but this should cost a price if they're doing it in a manner that is not good for the planet. And you can tell me from your perspective if any policies actually have been shifting the paradigm in terms of companies versus individuals versus government. I think all stakeholders should be involved, and companies, should be kind of pushed. Because if you look at Paris agreements, and this is what I'm going to finish with, the Paris agreements, contrary to what a lot of people believe, is nothing that countries actually have committed to. They've signed something that they hope for the best they're going to be able to achieve. But no one has actually gotten to the point of, following through with reducing emissions. And we've constantly, London surpassed its... so basically, yearly you have amount of emissions that, according to statistics from the past, you should be emitting, or you should be trying to reach as an increase. London got to its target within the first week of 2018. So you can understand that this balance between, that's kind of, good question and difficult answer to give.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to reach companies to change the behavior. Sometimes I think you do have to put some rules. So car industry, for example, I mean, electric car should be already a compulsory issue. So, and here comes the free rider issue. Like if Barcelona bans diesel cars to come into the city, okay, we can. But then the government officials will have to deal with these big lobbies with RAC, etc. But if we all do it together, so let's say, and here Paris is ahead of us in that sense. They're trying to make a big movement of cities in terms of putting some limits to car emissions. But here we need the collaborations and all together in that same direction. But unfortunately, for my experience, you do see some companies that are leading, you have Camper or whatever, that they use also as a marketing issue, the environmental issues. But in many cases, the industry changes when there are new regulations in place. For example, in Barcelona, we put the solar ordinance, which is it makes compulsory to put solar panels for heating water. And there was 1 year of the big lobby of construction saying, no, we don't want to do it because then that little increase of the cost of a building because you put solar panels will, collapse the construction industry. We all know that that this won't happen, but we had to put a moratorium of 1 year to let the sector adapt to that. But we were alone. Now we have more than 100 cities doing the same, and even the new Spanish building code is in place. But the other way around would have been much easier if we have a national regulation saying, look, if you make a new building in Spain, you need to put solar panels for heating at least 60% of your hot water. That would have been, and then the local governments, what we do is we support, we teach, but sometimes for what I've seen, it comes with some regulations, and here we have to be, prepared. But, then we have the international regulations, like we have some in Europe, although we say we need to work much more, etc. We are very happy to have these some environmental standards, and when we open to market into the America, what they can import, Parmigiano, that it's not from Parma, but they put it Parmigiano and that it's accepted. Then what we've achieved in the last 30 years, it can go always, we can always go back. But I think for me, regulation is a big issue, still too important. But I don't know if any other contributions.
It's really, yes, it's somewhat easier to have big companies become kind of more sustainable and socially responsible, but it's very difficult, of course, to ask them to be part of a degrowth direction, because companies within a capitalist system are the ones that they operate on competitive markets. They have to have profits, no? So they're mostly driven by profits. So I guess also Akbar here, their main responsibility is to have profit for the stakeholders. So the moment they see that something can threaten these profits, it's very difficult to have any room for negotiation there. But having said that, first of all, not all the economy is a competitive economy, no? So there are parts of the economy that they are not as competitive as big corporations competing in the utility sector and other things are working. So there is a space where competition does not play such a big role. Like, for example, if I was to think of restaurants in Barcelona, no, it's not true that one is competing with the other to have more profits each year, no? So like a restaurant, you have like a constant flow of money that it's enough to pay the owner and the workers enough, and that's set. So they are much more closer to a steady state logic. Then you have companies, like you said, Camper or some other companies that being part of a different type of imagined life, etc., is part of what they are about. So I think this can be also allies in this kind of transition. So some people have written articles about Patagonia, for example, which is a big company on the one hand, but on the other, at least in their principles, they don't put the profit and the return to their stakeholders first. They have many other values that they try to ascribe to, etc. So that's one thing. And of course, the other thing is like, how do we change the economy from being dominated by big for-profit corporations to an economy that has a bigger share of cooperatives or producing units that they don't have this logic of or imperative of profit. So if we could support the cooperative sector to occupy a bigger part of the economy, that's the biggest change, I think. It's a longer-term change, but I think it's an important one. Because if you're a cooperative and your main responsibility is to your workers to maintain their salaries and to have a reasonable return on what you're doing so that you can keep existing rather than keep expanding, I think that's a good model that makes it easier to have changes without clashing then with the logic of the firm.
Is there any other question?
First of all, thank you for your presentation, in which, apart from sustainability, we also talk about equality. I mean, we're raising a lot of social topics here, and I am personally concerned with greenwashing topics and bio-expensive markets putting the responsibility in individuals, blaming poor people that cannot afford sustainable products for climate change and stuff. So, in this way, from an economic theoretical perspective, I will make two simple questions to kind of put it forward. Can capitalism be sustainable, and could socialism be unsustainable? I mean, I think that equality and sustainable are two dimensions here that are maybe not that simple as to join just one thing with the other.
I was writing something on that yesterday, so I'm fresh. So, no, capitalism, I think the way capitalism works right now and we understand it, I don't think it can be sustainable. And socialism, I don't think there is a reason that it's going to be sustainable per se, you know? Now, these terms are very big, so once we get into the nitty-gritty of defining what we mean, it gets complicated, no? Because you start saying, okay, what exactly is capitalism and when it stops being capitalist or when it's less capitalistic. So for example, where social democracies in the 1950s, let's say, less capitalistic than UK or the US is today, can we say that there is a line, or were they both capitalistic and for that reason they're unsustainable, you know? So you start saying, or if we were to have certain changes within the current economies, like certain policies of a basic income, work sharing, environmental limits, would the system at the end be capitalistic, or would it have evolved into something different? I would argue that it would have evolved into something different. So in the sense that you mean it like capitalism, the way we understand it right now, and the way we understand capitalism more or less as private property, competition for profit, and the institutions of banking and finance, the way they work, this thing is unsustainable, I think. Now, socialism, again, what do we mean by socialism becomes a big question, no? Because people will tell you the socialist countries we know, the ones which was half of the world up until recently, they weren't really socialist. So if you say they weren't really socialist, then socialist becomes an abstract concept. If you say that they were socialist, or they were as socialist as it could get in the current context, then obviously they weren't also sustainable. So it's not that socialism is automatically sustainable, no? I think if we understand socialism or social democracy as a system where the collective or the government has more control of what happens in the economy, and that more of our lives does not pass through the market and through for-profit enterprises, but it's circulated through the commons. If we understand socialism in this abstract theoretical way, I think socialism could be more sustainable. But again, it would have to be a socialism that has this logic, has this project in mind, because if it's socialism that has in mind the project that we have to grow faster than capitalists, to have bigger weapons, or to buy better jeans for our people, you know, it doesn't make so much difference whether it's socialist or capitalist. So I would say making capitalism, current capitalism, more socialistic is the direction to go, but I think it's only half of the job if we're talking about sustainability and ecology. I don't know if that satisfied you, or yeah, more or less.
I think one of the biggest issues that we face is that, you know, both capitalism and socialism are ideologies, they're ideas, theories, and in practice they have kind of mutated into wherever they've been supposedly achieved. They've mutated in something that has proven to be dysfunctional. So I totally agree with you that we are moving now towards a society that is like, you know, following some sort of a market logic, but understands the human side of the story and understands the local aspect of the story and tries to build something around this. Berlin is a really good example. The choice of Plan A being there is, you know, purely for the fact that there's a lot of open-mindedness and a lot of move in the direction that you need to empower people locally. You need to work with like a market that actually appreciates the stuff that, you know, it produces, but also does it in a sustainable and functional manner. So I think we're moving towards something that we don't know, you know, something that doesn't exist yet. And it is up for us to like set up a new system, a new set of rules based on what we have seen that it doesn't work. Because, you know, ideologies were something that has hurt a lot of societies, and as we see even today, we're not going to get far if we continue with this kind of theoretical mindset that in practice is only drama. So yeah.
Just add also that now maybe we're talking more about Europe, but if you look at China, for me the problem is that when we see that other societies in development or much developed already now are copying the bad examples. So it's a pity that the developments in other parts of the world are just not getting always the best that we've achieved, but rather other options. So even in terms of urban development, for me, it's a pity what I was mentioning in the presentation about the new urban capacity, the new cities that have to be built, even every week, more than 1 million cities is coming up in the earth. the models, the urban models that are being redeveloped or copied are not Barcelona's, not only Barcelona's, but not, for me, European cities that have this complexity, this urban mix of lower density. These are not the models that are being developed in China and in other places. We are rather looking at more unsustainable models where people live in one area, go to the commercial center in the other area. You have a city of, at night, the big city during the day, and then there's empty after 7 p.m. until next morning. So it's a pity that the models that are being replicated in many places are not the more sustainable examples. But that's where we are in the fight of promoting the new models. Yeah.
So, anyone has any other question? Would you like to make like another portion? Okay. So thank you, everyone. We hope from Post-Crash you love this debate and you can reflect about it a bit more. Thank you.